I would like to turn to the work that you're doing with the Grassroots Reconciliation Group in northern Uganda. Um, and that work relates to livelihood for ex-combatants or those who've been directly involved or affected by conflict. Can you tell us a bit about what led you to form this group? What was the situation that motivated your involvement?
Sure. Well, I was a researcher out in Uganda with a local NGO that had worked on looking at root causes of the conflict in northern Uganda. So I was able to simply do interviews and not have to spend any project money for about 7 months or so, which was very beneficial. And then I joined on to a USAID contract called the Northern Uganda Peace Initiative, and as part of this USAID contract, our goal was to foster reconciliation in northern Uganda. And so we started these projects at the request of communities after pretty extensive consultations who told us that, well, there are certain programs to help former combatants and former child soldiers once they return, but they only last a couple of months. They basically take them for a month or two, give them a 1 hour counseling session, give them some medical treatment, and send them back into their communities. And yet when these people returned back into their communities, they faced a lot of stigma. As you can imagine, the communities were still upset about some of the atrocities that even the child soldiers had committed. And so we actually decided to help and go to communities and help address that medium to long-term reintegration issue. And what communities asked for was some kind of projects that would not only help that situation but also help increase their income because they faced a lot of economic isolation as well, having been in the bush as child soldiers for a number of years. So basically we took those demands and worked with them and created farming and brick making and counseling and microfinance projects whereby the ex-combatants and the communities will actually come together on these projects. And so you have these groups of 30 or so people, 20 to 40, who would come together and work toward these common goals, and in return reduce the stigma and sort of build reconciliation amongst each other.
And what has been the success rate? Do you find that people are actually able to be self-supporting?
We've found a lot of success so far. Yeah,
Good.
Mine is a fairly small and humble project, but through just a few staff members on the ground, we've been able to turn $35,000 a year into 400 or so project beneficiaries. And so we run 27 projects in 8 different communities, and we're actually looking to graduate some of the groups this year so that they don't have to depend on initiatives and capital spending from us. And it's pretty interesting. The groups actually take their initial investments and then develop their own initiatives on top of that. So, for example, several of the groups have started microfinance operations of their own, which is pretty interesting. So one of our groups gave out 24 new loans last year, all of their own money. Every dollar which was loaned out was actually returned, with the interest payments. And so 24 new people were able to start new businesses with those. So they sell, small things. They open shops, they do tailoring, they sell fish, etc. And to me, that just shows that people are really willing to take, even a small help project and turn it into something bigger. And it's really empowering for me to see, people who spent 4 or 5 years killing people in the bush and now able to run a project for 20 or 30 people and seen as a kind of a community leader.
But I think equally impressive is the sustainability dimension, that the group is earning funds and reinvesting in the community so that when you go onto another project, that survives. And I think that sustainability challenge is one that is very important in areas that want to emerge from conflict. They don't want to backslide, and that is very possible in the community to become vulnerable when an external helping hand is pulled away. You were doing research in Uganda for some months before you began the actual work as a practitioner. Was that time well spent?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I wouldn't feel comfortable, running or designing a program for an area that I hadn't spent, several months doing some pretty extensive research. I took a lot of what we developed from an interesting person who'd done a lot of these government studies, Robert Gersoni, who'd done these kind of conflict studies. He did one in Mozambique, he did one in northern Uganda, and he basically went out and interviewed hundreds of people over a period of 3 or 4 months, and then came back with a pretty extensive report, because to me, it's so easy to go and meet a couple of interested parties on the ground who will say, "Oh, we would love to do a project with you," and boom, you go back to your headquarters and you found your partner and that's it. But to actually go and interview women's groups, elders groups, youth groups, politicians, taxi drivers, you name it, about all of the issues that are important for them without even having an agenda to begin with in terms of what you would like to do, I think is really critical and very, very helpful. I try to take that model wherever I can. I think that the second thing that's been quite useful in my work more recently is to try to get some stories and document them from the ground in order to explain to people back in the U.S. and Europe what the situation on the ground in these places are. And so you hear a lot about Iraq and Afghanistan. That's obviously the concentration for U.S. policy, but places in like Sierra Leone or Uganda or DRC Congo don't get as much attention. And so I think something that has been quite helpful in my work is doing short video work, or writing articles or opinion pieces, with people's stories in them, and understand how, somebody's mother was affected in this regard, or somebody's daughter was affected in this regard, or somebody's job was lost in this way, and so that's been quite helpful too. That's something we're working on now, is to make video op-eds and those type of things. So.
Well, I certainly look forward to seeing them, and I'd like to thank you for participating in our video exercise and bringing some of the reality a little bit closer.
Great. Well, I really thank you for having me.